All right, so we are going to be moving into our new unit. So we moved past Christopher Columbus and we're starting to move into the age of like the Pilgrims and the settlers and starting this early period of colonialism. So we're going to start off with some base notes today, and our goal is to be able to explain the difference between a civil right and a natural right. So there's two different rights that the English are going to use as their justifications for why they start taking this land for the natives. And so today our main goal is to be able to explain the difference between a civil right and a natural right. So starting out in your notes, let's talk about Jamestown, April 26, 1607. So on that morning, it was like a gray foggy day. And these three small ships carrying the colonists from England arrived in Jamestown, what became known as Jamestown, Virginia. So they named it Jamestown after King James. And this ended up serving as the capital of the colony of Virginia. So they were wanting to travel away from England and set up their own colony. But why exactly did this happen? So you move into number 2, it's talking about the Virginia colony and their overall goals. So the English government, they weren't able to fund this trip because the English government was pretty much broke at the time. So they ended up having a private business, the Virginia Company, funded. So pretty much what happened was these rich elites, they owned stocks in the company that ended up funding the trip. And they funded it with the understanding that they would get a return on their payment from whatever was discovered on their trip. So these rich elites, they funded this trip by buying stock into the company. So they invested in the company with the understanding that if they were whatever they found, that would be like their payment. So they were hoping and betting on a lot of resources and a lot of gold to be found. And so that main goal, that leads us to the main goal. They want to find gold and other natural resources to pay back the investors who originally funded this trip. So that's why they're in this, find gold or resources at any cost. So they're having to fund that, as we call it, the system of empire, or capitalism is what it's going to become known as. So we get to the causes of early colonization. There's two big sections for this. The first one is that it dealt with national and religious rivalries. So national and religious rivalries. So England, France, and Spain, all of their empires, they were rivals. We've learned about this from last year and this year. They were all three rivals. They were trying to become the best empire in Europe, which essentially meant the world at the time. So people were breaking away from the Catholic Church / the Church of England. So not only was there national rivalries between the empires, but there was rivalries among different religions. And the second cause of early colonization was this growth of the elites, so these rich merchant class. So they wanted to invest in overseas expansion and then seize more of the earth. So they wanted to invest and make more money by investing in these explorations that went around the world that also expanded the land that they owned. Okay, so talking about freedom and lack of freedom, making the new world great again, or I guess great since it's technically new, right? But anyway, the colonists believed that they would have more freedom and opportunity in the new world. So they thought by leaving England that they would end up getting more opportunities and more freedoms than they had in England. But the only way that the colonists could have these opportunities was from taking away the rights and lands of the Native Americans. So the only way that they were able to actually get these rights and opportunities was by taking away the rights and lands of the Native Americans, because you can't just show up in North America and it's not like it was just empty. It was a thriving civilization of Native Americans that the English just started to wipe out or leave, or forced to leave. And so the only way to succeed to get opportunities and lands was to take away the rights of Native Americans. But then the only way to succeed once you had that land was to import African slaves as labor. So we're going to talk about the beginning of African slave trades in the United States in the next unit. But just to briefly touch on it, the only way to succeed with this new land, that now that they had this land that they had stolen from the natives, they had to import slaves, African slaves, to serve as their labor resource. But in the very beginning, they also had this thing called indentured servants. And so indentured servants, starting out, settlers that were able to pay for their own passage to the New World, aka the elites, they could move to America and be free, and they were just given land, essentially. They could get as much land as they wanted because they were rich. Not everybody could do that. Nearly 2/3 of the settlers were indentured servants. And so they had to pay for their passage to America. They couldn't just pay for it out of their pocket. The way that they paid for it was this thing called being an indentured servant. And so essentially, they agreed to work for a period of time in return for having passage to the New World. So they would say to these elites, hey, I will work for you for 7 years, 5 to 7 years, and you will then pay for my passage to the New World. And so there were some similarities and differences between the slaves and the indentured servants. Some of the similarities is that the servants can be bought and sold just like slaves. They also weren't allowed to marry without permission, and they could have physical punishment like the slaves. But some of the differences is that, indentured servants, they could look forward to actually being free one day, maybe. That was if they could actually survive their time as a servant. So they could actually look forward to being free one day, but only if they ended up surviving that amount of time, which there wasn't a great chance of to begin with. Okay, so the Englishmen, they claim to gain these lands, but North America was already kind of occupied with the Native Americans. So, land in North America obviously was already occupied for thousands of years by Native Americans. But unlike the Spanish conquistadors, the English only wanted land not completely dominate the population. So the English, they wanted the land, but they didn't want to do it by wiping out the natives. They just wanted to force the natives to leave. So the English wanted to keep to themselves, but just move the natives off the lands to achieve it. So they didn't want to have to intermingle with the natives or anything like that. They just wanted to tell them, all right, leave, essentially. So as you can probably guess, it's not going to go over that great, or so you'd think. So this Native American leader, Powhatan, and his reaction to the English landing in Jamestown, how do you think he would react? Probably not that great. But in reality, he actually did not attack them at all, but actually welcomed them. That's what we're going to notice each and every time, from Columbus to Chief Powhatan to, as time goes on and on and on, the natives are very welcoming to the English and the European settlers. So he didn't attack, but welcomed them. And when the settlers were starving, Powhatan took some in and actually let them join their villages. So, a lot of the European settlers ended up running away from their village and tried to join the natives, and the natives welcomed them in. So they were very welcoming and, let them join their people. Okay. So the English start to claim these native lands, and it gave them the sense of entitlement. So the English claimed that the natives did not have the right to their land, so they could just, quote, buy it from them, which, was usually forced after a military defeat. So the English said, you know what, the natives don't have a right to this land, so we can just buy it from them, or so they would say. But really, it was the natives and the English went to battle numerous times throughout the early years of the settlers. And the English, because they kept winning these battles, it gave them a sense of superiority and a feeling of entitlement to the land that they believed they earned from winning the battles. So the Native Americans, or the English, excuse me, they felt like they deserved that land because they thought in their mind that they had fought for it and they had earned it. So it was entitled to them. And so then we get to this guy named John Winthrop. And the excuse that he makes for why the natives, for the English taking the natives' land. So he was a religious English leader who created the belief that natives had no right to the land because they had not, in his words, subdued or conquered the land. He said they only had a natural right to it because they just lived there. But he said because they hadn't subdued the land or conquered the land, which I guess that meant in their words, in their eyes, it was civilizing the land. Because they had not civilized the land, they did not deserve it, which that makes no sense because they had thriving cultures, and villages and whole civilizations, but to the Europeans, that wasn't the case. So John Winthrop, he believed that they had not subdued it, so they only had a natural right to it. Which, speaking of natural and civil rights, thinking of our learning goal, we wanted to be able to explain the difference between a natural and a civil right. So a civil right, that is rights that you have just because, or you have because you have conquered a land, so it is legal. It is legally yours in their eyes back then, just to get an idea of the difference. So the rights that you have because you have conquered a land, so it is legal. So rights you have as a citizen. A natural right, rights that you have by being a human, but not civilized. It's kind of questionable, but natural rights are rights that every living being has, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are civilized. So that's where the difference comes in. The English thought that they had a right to it because they were civilized and they had conquered, in their eyes, the land. Whereas natural rights, that's just rights that every human being has. So then we get to the Pilgrims and Plymouth in 1620. So, the Puritans, who were the Pilgrims, they broke away from the Church of England. And so they left England and originally went to the Netherlands. But then in 1620, they started to come to the New World, quote, quote. And in 1620, they arrived in what is today the northeastern United States, so around Massachusetts, Connecticut, the northeast United States. They settled and arrived in the northeast United States. But right before they landed, they made this thing called the Mayflower Compact, which is really important to make sure you put in your notes. The Mayflower Compact, they agreed to obey just and equal laws created by people they chose to represent them. So the Mayflower Compact, it was an agreement that they would obey laws that were created by people who they chose to represent them. So it sounds kind of similar to our government, doesn't it? So this is actually the first written form of government in what became known as the United States. So this was the first form of written government in North America. So this Mayflower Compact. So it's pretty much an agreement by all the people that they would obey the laws that they created by those they chose to represent them. So kind of like we choose representatives and senators, they chose representatives to create laws that they would all agree to follow. Okay, so finally though, after 12 years of these back and forth, the Indians trying, or the Native Americans trying to be welcoming to the Europeans and the Europeans taking advantage of it, the Native Americans finally had enough. So like I mentioned, after 12 years of these small little battles back and forths, the Native Americans had enough and they ended up attacking the English settlers. And they took revenge on them. They killed like 300 English settlers. And the settlers, they responded by having an all-out massive war that they went about trying to wipe out the natives. That was like their excuse to finally just kill them all. So number 14, it talks about the Pequot War of 1636. So what exactly was it? It was a war between the Pequot and the Puritans. So the Native Americans and the Puritan Pilgrims. And so why did the English end up attacking the Pequot? So really, they wanted the natives out of the way so that they could have their land. and they wanted to control the area for its resources. So it was for land and resources, essentially. And what system of fighting did the English use? That's the most important thing from this little section. It's this thing called divide and conquer, which we talked about last year if you had me for world history. But divide and conquer, and it's something that Europeans are going to use throughout history. So it's where they pit the Native Americans against one another. So they take one tribe and another tribe, and they say, well, hey, this tribe, if you'll help us beat your rivals, then we'll let you have their land. So they let the natives fight each other, and then they just kill whoever's left at the end. So they would pit the Native Americans against one another and let the English not have to fight. And so a lot of people say, well, why didn't the natives, why didn't they work together to fight a common enemy? And it was because the natives allowed the English to play them against one another, and it made them all lose. So, the natives let what today we call politics get in the way. So they let, rivalries get in the way, and it ended up causing them to all lose to the English. So that is the first Pequot War. Last section. So we get to the second Pequot War. This is AKA King Philip's War, except not really, but that's what it's called. So King Philip's War, what was this war over? It was the English, they used the supposed murder of a settler as an excuse to start another war. So this was 40 years later after the first Pequot War. And so they used the supposed murder of a settler as an excuse to start a war. And, this excuse for going to war, they claimed that they were just trying to defend themselves. They said, oh, hey, this soldier of ours, or this settler of ours was killed. So we're just trying to defend ourselves from, other attacks, when really they were the ones that were going and wiping out the natives. They were the ones that went out and was looking for a fight. And so the elites were the ones who actually pushed to fight this war. It wasn't an agreed upon, everybody was ready for a war. It was actually the elites that pushed to fight the war. So think about it. Why would the elites want to go to war? What good does that benefit them? It's because they wanted to gain access to the land that they could win through this war, because it would mean more profits for them. So they wanted to gain access to the land, which meant more profits for them. And, the English technically won, but they lost a tremendous amount of people in the process. So the English technically ended up winning, but they ended up losing a tremendous amount of people. So that's going to kind of set the stage for the Native American and the English relationship at this time. They really aren't on great terms because they've had two major wars in the last 60 years. And, hundreds of thousands of natives have died because of this. So I know there's about 6 or 8 discussion questions that are still in your notes. These are the ones that we will cover in class together on Nearpod the next time we meet. So remember, we will answer our summarizer in class. We will answer our discussion questions in class. And if you have any questions about the notes that we went over today, make sure to put a star beside them, and we'll go over them at the beginning of the next class when we first meet. At the very bottom of this slide right here, you see Pequot War for the second time. You can disregard that. I did not mean to put that there. So y'all enjoy. If you have any questions, let me know, and I will see y'all the next time we meet in person.